In August 1939, days before World War II erupted, a small German aircraft made history over Rostock. No propeller, no armament, just 6 minutes of flight that would revolutionize aviation forever. This was the Heinkel He 178, the world's first jet-powered aircraft. While the fastest fighters of 1943 struggled to reach 450 miles per hour, just 10 years later, jets were breaking the sound barrier, rewriting every rule of flight. The transformation was staggering. In 1943, the North American P-51B Mustang topped out at 440 miles per hour. The Supermarine Spitfire Mark 9 reached 410 miles per hour, and the German Focke-Wulf FW-190 managed just over 400 miles per hour. These were the pinnacle of piston-powered flight, representing decades of incremental progress. By 1953, everything had changed. The English electric Canberra bomber could cruise at 480 miles per hour. Fighter aircraft like the MiG-17 and Hawker Hunter pushed past 600 miles per hour in level flight. At the cutting edge, the North American F-100 Super Sabre became the first production fighter capable of supersonic speed in level flight, twice as fast as the best fighters from just a decade earlier. This wasn't just about speed. Runways stretched into miles of concrete. Gun sights required radar guidance. Cockpits needed pressurization for the thin air at 50,000 feet. Wings swept back like arrows to slice through the sound barrier. The jet engine had collapsed decades of incremental progress into a single breathtaking leap, forcing every aspect of aviation to evolve simultaneously. By the 1930s, aviation engineers faced a fundamental physics problem: propeller tip speed. As aircraft speeds increased, the outer ends of propeller blades approached the speed of sound, creating shock waves that caused efficiency drops, severe vibration, and mechanical stress. This wasn't an absolute barrier, but progress beyond this point became an exercise in diminishing returns. The noise alone was unbearable. Supersonic propeller tips generated constant sonic booms, hundreds per second. The Republic XF-84 H Thunderscreech demonstrated this enthusiastically in the 1950s, with propeller tips rotating at Mach 1.18. It became infamous for being audible from dozens of miles away, causing ground crews to report nausea, headaches, and seizures. This physical limitation made alternative propulsion methods attractive to forward-thinking engineers. The gas turbine, long studied in stationary applications, offered a solution. The principle was simple: draw in air, compress it, mix with fuel, combust, and expel at high velocity for thrust. But building a lightweight, reliable turbine capable of continuous high-power operation presented monumental challenges that would require revolutionary advances in metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and aerodynamic understanding. Two brilliant engineers were working independently toward the same goal. In Britain, RAF officer Frank Whittle began developing jet propulsion concepts in the late 1920s. His design featured a single-stage centrifugal compressor paired with multiple external combustion chambers feeding a single axial turbine. Unfortunately, Whittle struggled to gain official support, founding Power Jets Limited in 1936 with minimal funding. Meanwhile, in Germany, physics student Hans von Ohain at the University of Göttingen was pursuing his own turbojet concept. His design combined an axial inducer stage with a centrifugal compressor, creating a hybrid arrangement that provided smoother airflow and a more compact engine. Lacking industrial backing, he partnered with Max Hahn, a local car mechanic who could turn sketches into functional test rigs. The question of whether von Ohain borrowed from Whittle's ideas is complex. Von Ohain's attorney discovered Whittle's 1930 patent before filing their own in 1935, but both men later agreed these were genuinely different engineering solutions to the same problem. Post-war technical comparisons convinced both that this was true simultaneous invention, a rare case in aviation history. But von Ohain was about to receive backing that Whittle could only dream of. Ernst Heinkel was never a man to sit back and follow orders. In the 1930s, while most German aircraft companies built what the Reich Air Ministry demanded, Heinkel pursued his own risky ideas in secret. His philosophy was simple. The future of aviation belonged not to incremental piston engine improvements, but to bold new power plants. When Hans von Ohain and Max Hahn approached him in 1935 with a crude turbojet concept, Heinkel immediately grasped the possibilities. He agreed to bankroll their project, not as part of an official Luftwaffe program, but as a private gamble. This clandestine spirit wasn't unique to the jet project. Around the same time, Heinkel authorized another radical idea, a liquid-fueled rocket aircraft developed with Werner von Braun. That became the He 176. Meanwhile, von Ohein's jet work was directed toward what would become the He 178. Both projects consumed company resources without government guarantees, but Heinkel's appetite for risk was legendary. In 1936, von Ohain and Hahn formally joined Heinkel's Mariennähe facility. For the first time, they had access to skilled craftsmen, advanced materials, and even wind tunnel testing. Heinkel gave them a dedicated workshop where their theoretical concepts could be translated into hardware. Within a year, von Ohain had produced the He S-1, a primitive hydrogen-fueled turbojet. It ran in September 1937, proving the principle of jet thrust in Germany for the very first time. It was an extraordinary achievement, a functioning jet engine built outside the supervision of the Air Ministry, driven entirely by Heinkel's belief in radical innovation. In backing von Ohain, Heinkel had taken a dangerous gamble. If the project failed, it would ruin his reputation and drain resources. But if it succeeded, he would change aviation forever. The He 178 wasn't built as a combat aircraft. It was a flying testbed designed by Siegfried and Walter Günther alongside Heinrich Hertel to answer one question: could von Ohein's turbojet actually propel an airplane into the sky? With that goal in mind, the design emphasized simplicity and weight reduction. The wings were straight, wooden, and high-mounted, fitted with large flaps and simple ailerons. The fuselage was compact, little more than a pod for the pilot, fuel, and engine. The centerpiece, of course, was the He S-3B turbojet. This engine evolved directly from von Ohein's earlier hydrogen-fueled experiments. Unlike Frank Whittle's straight-through centrifugal designs in Britain, the He S-3B used a reverse-flow annular combustion chamber. After compression, air was ducted forward around the chamber and then reversed to flow back into the turbine. This shortened the overall engine length, though it created additional aerodynamic losses. The airflow path was unconventional. Air entered a circular nose intake, traveled down a duct beneath the cockpit and fuel tank, and finally reached the engine mounted in the fuselage. Exhaust gases then exited through a long pipe extending nearly a third of the aircraft's length. The HES-3B itself employed a 14-blade inducer, a 16-blade centrifugal compressor, and a 12-blade radial turbine. It could run on petrol or diesel, giving flexibility in fuel supply. The He 178 was minimalistic by necessity, but that was its genius. By reducing the design to the essentials, pilot, fuel, and engine, the Günther brothers created a machine uniquely suited for experimentation. It wasn't fast, maneuverable, or combat-capable. What mattered was whether it could fly at all. Turning the HES-3B from an experimental engine into a working aircraft power plant would become one of aviation's greatest engineering leaps. Initial flight testing didn't involve the He 178 directly. In mid-1939, von Ohein's HES-3A engine was mounted beneath a Heinkel He 118 bomber for airborne trials. These early flights were conducted at dawn in strict secrecy. Test pilot Erich Varsitz and engineer Walter Kunzel monitored the engine carefully. Ernst Heinkel later recalled the first ignition. A bluish jet flame erupted, and the 118 suddenly surged forward with shocking power. Several successful flights followed before disaster struck. The He S-3A suffered a fire and burned itself out after landing. The failure underscored the risks but also validated the concept turbojet power worked in flight. Heinkel pressed forward with his dedicated test aircraft, the He 178. On August 27, 1939, the world changed. At Rostock, Marine, Varsitz climbed into the He 178, now fitted with the improved He S-3B engine. The maiden flight lasted only 6 minutes, but it was revolutionary. The fixed landing gear created immense drag, and no one knew how long the engine would run reliably. After 2 circuits, a fuel pump began failing. Visibility was poor due to morning mist, yet Varsitz executed a dangerous side-slip approach and landed safely. It was the first jet-powered flight in history. No propellers, no pistons, just smooth, continuous thrust from a turbojet engine. For Heinkel, it was vindication of his gamble. For aviation, it was the dawn of a new era. Yet, even this momentous achievement was cloaked in secrecy. Outside of Heinkel's circle, almost no one knew what had happened. Germany was about to plunge into war, and the significance of this 6-minute flight would be overlooked by leaders focused on conventional aircraft. The revolution had begun, but its recognition would take much longer. By September 1939, Europe was at war. 2 months later, Heinkel arranged for Germany's top aviation leaders to witness his creation. On November 1, 1939, Generals Ernst Udet and Erhard Milch of the Reich Air Ministry arrived at Marine to see the He 178 fly. After some difficulty starting the engine, Varsitz performed multiple passes, even buzzing the airfield at low altitude. The officials were not impressed. Udet dismissed the jet as an interesting toy, encapsulating the Luftwaffe's skepticism. Germany's war machine demanded mass production of proven piston engine fighters and bombers, not risky experimental craft. Heinkel was bitterly disappointed. He had unveiled the future of aviation, only to have it brushed aside. Behind the scenes, however, the demonstration wasn't entirely ignored. The RLM's technical office quietly allocated more resources to jet research, but the contracts went primarily to Junkers and BMW, whose axial flow engines aligned better with official doctrine. Heinkel's centrifugal flow jets were sidelined. The He 178 itself made only a handful of flights before being retired. Tragically, the prototype was destroyed in a 1943 Allied bombing raid. Despite this neglect, the He 178 had already secured its place in history. It proved beyond doubt that jet propulsion was not a fantasy but a practical reality. That single 6-minute flight in August 1939 had demonstrated the viability of turbojets, prompting Germany's accelerated jet program. Within 5 years, operational Me-262 fighters, descendants of the He 178's pioneering work, would take to the skies. Heinkel's gamble had succeeded scientifically, but failed politically. The glory and production contracts went elsewhere, leaving Heinkel sidelined. Yet the He 178 remains a landmark achievement, the world's first jet aircraft, a fragile experimental machine that opened the door to the jet age. Its legacy endures as both triumph and cautionary tale. The Heinkel He 178's 6-minute flight changed aviation forever, yet the aircraft itself was quickly forgotten. Hans von Ohain immigrated to America under Operation Paperclip, later meeting Frank Whittle and developing a warm friendship despite their parallel development paths. Both men pushed back against narratives suggesting one copied the other, united by bringing an entirely new form of propulsion to the world. To learn about the jet that actually made it to combat, watch our video on the Messerschmitt Me-262.